Hello, everyone. Grab my As a mother and a teacher and a mentor, I have held the belief, and I've always encouraged others to embrace that in life we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because life is really uncomfortable. And so today, in front of all of you, for whom I have great respect, I'm going to share my journey with cholangiocarcinoma in the hopes of growing through my discomfort, gaining strength in my vulnerability, and celebrating the power of shared experience. What started off as persistent heartburn in the summer of 2021 ended up being a large mass on my liver, a diagnosis of cancer of an unknown primary, and a 3-month-long search with tests and scans and appointments for the primary source. But 2 days before Christmas and my daughter's birthday, my daughter's birthday is Christmas, sorry, I received a phone call from a surgeon who told me that it looked like it was not this cancer of an unknown primary, rather cholangiocarcinoma. And that didn't sound all that reassuring, but he did tell me that I was a candidate for resection, and that brought me some hope in that moment. He asked us to isolate because we were in the thick of COVID, and even though our children were coming home for the holidays from school, we did keep them at home so that no one became ill and I was able to have that surgery. On January 13th, 2022, my husband drove me to the Health Sciences Center in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. And at the time, he was not allowed to enter the hospital with me. So in the car, thank you, in the car, on the way, in the car, we kissed each other goodbye. We told each other we loved each other. And then we joked and said, maybe I'll see you later, maybe I won't. And then I walked out of the car, and I walked into those doors in the hospital. And that remains to this day the most terrified that I have ever felt, and yet the bravest that I have ever felt. And that really was the foundation for the rest of this journey. The bravery in that moment prepared me for everything that followed. I woke up many hours later and was told that the surgery had been a success, that I had clear margins, there was no lymph node involvement, and there was hope. Shortly after, I started chemotherapy, but by the spring of 2022, I could tell that something was wrong. I just had it. I could just feel in my gut that something was wrong. And by the summer of 2022, my team confirmed a recurrence. We were at the lake when we got the call. But this time, even though it was a devastation, this time I was better prepared. I had found the foundation, I had accessed some of the resources, I had joined the Facebook group and had connected with patients and caregivers. I had heard Dr. Knox's name at Princess Margaret Hospital in Toronto about 1,000 times, and I knew it was time to connect with her. I asked about molecular testing, and I found a medical consulting firm in Toronto, Canada, that would assemble all of my medical records so that we were prepared to pursue second opinions. I started on standard of care, gemcitabine and cisplatin. Unfortunately, at the time, durvalumab was not approved in Canada for standard of care, but after a considerable amount of advocating, we were able to add it to my protocol. It became very clear that I was not responding to the chemotherapy and the immunotherapy, and we were starting to look at next steps, and that's when Dr. Knox called me, and I could hear an excitement in her voice. And she said, Cynthia, there was a mix-up or some type of inconsistency with the original test results of your molecular testing, and you do have a highly targetable fusion. And I've waited my whole life, my whole career for someone to come along with this fusion. And so boy, was I excited. And then she said, you have an NTRK1 fusion. And I had no clue what that meant at the time. But I knew it was good. At least that was the messaging. But again, another moment of hope. And so we advocated for access to that drug. And in January of 2023, I started taking larotrectinib for my NTRK1 fusion. The hope was that I would have a significant response, perhaps even a complete response. But shortly, within a few months, we could tell that it wasn't working. My disease was not responding. And at that point, along with my team in Manitoba and my team in Ontario, it became obvious that we needed to connect with Dr. Jablé at MD Anderson. My husband and I went down to MD Anderson in May of 2023. Dr. Jablé was so comforting. He was realistic, and he offered hope, but he also shared how serious the situation was. He suggested that we retest the original sample, but he also recommended new testing, both liquid and tissue biopsies. We went back home, and while we waited for the test results, we switched to another targeted therapy that we accessed through a compassionate program. Unfortunately, I did not respond to that targeted therapy either, but the results from the new molecular testing came back. And I received an email from Dr. Jablé telling me that I had this new biomarker that came up was an ERRFI1 biomarker. Again, it meant nothing to me at the time. But he told me that a colleague of his had written a paper and that I might respond to a drug called erlotinib if I could get access to that drug. And so that became our pursuit. After much advocating, it took 3 months to convince a team in Manitoba that we should have access to this drug that had proven efficacy in treating similar mutations in lung cancer. We received compassionate access to that drug. And in October of 2023, when the walls were really closing in and my liver was covered in metastatic lesions, I started taking that drug. And 5 weeks later, when I had my first scan, my disease had improved significantly. Some of the lesions were gone, and the ones that were remaining were significantly smaller. It's remarkable, right? By summer of 2024, I was able to travel to Toronto and see Dr. Dawson, who's also here today. And she treated the remaining 3 lesions with SBRT in hopes of further stabilizing my disease. At present, I'm mostly stable, but we continue to monitor my disease with regular scans, and I am still on that targeted therapy. And I just want to add that last night I had this really magical moment. It was this full circle moment where Dr. Jablé pulled me aside to introduce me to Dr. Borad, the doctor that wrote the paper that, I mean, everyone has had a part in saving my life, but that paper, there was a time where I could, well, I couldn't really recite it, let's be real, but there was a time where I could really reference it. And so it was just such an honor to meet him, and I hope that it meant as much to him as it meant to me. And thank you, Dr. Jablé, for orchestrating that, because that was perhaps my most impactful moment of this conference. Over the last 3.5 years, we've navigated these stages of grief. We hear about stages of grief all the time, and navigating grief is much like navigating any other experience that you have. With my experience, navigating grief has been this fluid, cyclical experience. I kind of look at it like, I imagine those old stereos, the ones where there was the power button, but then you could play around with the volume and the bass and I'm not even sure what else was on there. But that's how I imagine grief. Grief is this, you can't turn it on and off because then nothing is functioning. But you can dial things up and down. You can dial, sometimes your fear's dialed up, sometimes it's dialed down. Sometimes your acceptance is dialed up, and sometimes it's dialed down. But the idea is that everything is always still on, and you're working within that. All of it is important to the experience. But for me, 4 pivotal stages remain impactful in my journey. And the first was fear. When I was first diagnosed, and again with my reoccurrence in 2022, I felt such a great deal of fear. I was 41. I had only been married for 10 short years to the love of my life. I had 2 young children. And it was like in those moments, your whole life, everything you've envisioned for your life, it just slips away. And as it slips away, this fear sets in, this deep fear, and you feel it, not just in the pit of your stomach, but you feel it in your soul. Am I going to die? Am I going to leave my husband, my children? Am I going to lose my hair? Am I going to lose weight, gain weight? Am I going to be able to work? Will I have an identity outside of cancer? There's also the feeling of isolation. With a cancer diagnosis, I was fairly young, but being diagnosed with a cancer that you didn't know anyone that had it, and then on top of that, I'd never heard the word cholangiocarcinoma. And it's isolating. There's no local community. It took 2 years for me to meet someone with cholangiocarcinoma because of an absence of local community. I met people virtually. I connected virtually, but to meet someone locally, it took 2 years. And then comes in frustration. Frustration with your body, frustration with a system that at times is very challenging to navigate, especially in certain contexts. Frustration with a lack of access, specifically where I lived at the time, to specialized care. A lack of community, and sometimes a lack of hope. But then, as you continue to navigate those stages, you get to a point. And even though you still feel all that fear and that isolation and that loneliness and that frustration, you get to this point of acceptance. And it's a radical acceptance. But it's an acceptance. And with acceptance comes resolve. It's kind of the other hand of acceptance. And it's a resolve to pursue options, opinions, to pursue connection, community, and to foster hope, and to live as well as possible for as long as possible in the face of cancer. When I first had my reoccurrence, I was at the lake, as I mentioned. The phone rang. I was told I had many metastatic lesions, and that we should talk about next steps, but that I should really also start talking about the time that I had left and what I wanted to do with it. And I really appreciate, there's a doctor in Manitoba, her name was Dr. Cron, she's since retired, but I really appreciated that honesty. She didn't necessarily tell me you have 6 months to live, go enjoy your family, but what she said to me was, it's time to start that's the severity of this situation, it's time to start thinking about that. And I've had many different physicians and others over the years who have said to me, I think I've been told 5 or 6 times that you've got 6 months left to live, and it's been 3.5 years, so I think I'm doing okay here. But I do appreciate that her honesty in that moment. But I was obviously upset. And I remember going into the room, my bedroom, because I didn't want to scare my kiddos. And I fell apart. It's the first time I really, really fell apart. I sobbed. I think at one point I even had a pillow so I could scream so that no one could hear me. And after a while, my husband came into the room. And if you've ever met Drew, I kind of joke about it because no one's ever met Drew. But I promise he's real, and he's a good, good man. And he walked into the room, and he put his hands on my shoulders, and he looked me in the eyes. And Drew has a quiet strength about him. He doesn't have to say much, but you know that he's going to be strong. And he said to me, "It's going to be okay, even if you're not okay." And as a mom, I needed someone to say that to me. Because as sad as I was for myself in that moment, the guilt that I felt about the possibility of leaving my children was far more significant. So for him to look at me and tell me that it would be okay and that they would be okay allowed me to move beyond that guilt. We sat in the room for a long while. We told each other we loved each other. We talked about how scared we were. We talked about how angry we were. And then once we had all of that out, we promised to hold space for those feelings always and to always talk about them when we needed to talk about them. But we also decided in that moment that we were going to continue to love fiercely, to choose joy, and to be hopeful. And that we were going to live fully in spite of cancer. Oh, sorry, I gotta go back. Early on, my children and I started looking for hearts, found hearts in nature, whether it be a cloud in the sky or a rock on the ground, or maybe it was when I made my coffee in the morning and poured in the milk, it unexpectedly, there was a little shape of a heart. And we would talk about how love surrounds us. And at first, I selfishly saw it as this opportunity for my children to be reminded of me in my absence, to be reminded of me and that the love that I had for them. But it grew into something more beautiful. We started having friends and family from all over the world send us pictures of found hearts. We would make photo albums. We would make reels and share them on Instagram. And now my children have asked just recently to make a real book, Mom. So we have a current project that we're working on, and it is called Finding Hearts and Feeling Loved. And if I always say this when I share this information, but if you know a good publisher, we're looking for one. So that's my little side note there. In terms of choosing joy, that came really came very easily for us. We live joyous lives. We are so fortunate. But we did make an effort. We made an effort to travel more. We made an effort to make special dates. We made an effort to just really be in the moment and be mindful of our time together. And one thing that we really love doing, and you can see the picture of it, is confetti. At every moment where we can celebrate something in life, we use confetti. And then we take a little bit of that confetti and we put it in a jar. And there's a jar in our living room with all the different confetti over the last 3.5 years. And it's a constant reminder of the joy that exists in our life despite the darkness. I think what we've learned about joy is that joy really does happen in small moments, and really, those moments aren't that small. Those small moments that we take for granted every day, those are the big moments. And that is such a gift that we learned. And then the last piece to our embracing love and joy and hope was the hope. And you know, I like to say, I've added it to my lanyard here, that I am rebelliously hopeful. Early on, Drew and I decided we have an acceptance of the diagnosis, but we reject the prognosis. And that was the genesis for our rebellious hope. And rebellious hope means committing to relentlessly pursuing, and again, options and opinions and community and hope. And I think when I love this quote by Greta Thunberg, but the only thing we need more than hope is action. Because when we act, hope is everywhere. And I thought about this morning when I was going over what I wanted to really talk about. And these last few days, these 3 past days, have been action. This entire conference is about action. And this action inspires hope. And I guarantee you that every single person sitting in this room today and watching online is leaving this conference with more hope than they came with. And that's the power of action. In Winnipeg, there is a store called The Unexpected Gift. And I remember when it opened a few years ago, I was curious about why. And I learned that it was a woman, a cancer survivor, who had opened it because she had found so many unexpected gifts along her journey. And she wanted to give back to her community, and she wanted to share what those gifts were. And I hadn't been diagnosed yet. And I thought, that's unfathomable to me, that there would be an unexpected gift linked to cancer. I had had family that had had cancer. I had friends that had had cancer. But I hadn't ever felt any gifts from that experience. And then I was diagnosed with cancer. And after we moved through the initial pain and shock and fear and disappointment, I came to this place where I realized if I worked at it, I was being given these opportunities, these little gifts, these opportunities to appreciate certain things, to value things differently, to appreciate things differently. I was able to transform my pain into purpose. And today, I'm no longer teaching, but I do wear many hats, and somehow they're all very closely linked to teaching. But one of them is that I am a patient advocate and partner with Cancer Care Manitoba, the Cholangiohepatocellular Carcinoma Canada, and the C3, who's here this week as well. I'm also a mentor with CCF. I'm really blind, I'm realizing. I can't see that. I also am an ambassador for fundraising for Manitoba Cancer Care Manitoba Foundation. I help moderate a group of young mums with cholangiocarcinoma, a Facebook group, where I have connected with women who are in the same season of life as I am, and we have forged some pretty incredible friendships. And I am also recently launched the Manitoba Cholangiocarcinoma Community, which is a local community in Manitoba, so that we have monthly meetups, we help each other advocate, and we have connections with clinicians and researchers and surgeons in Manitoba. And there's actually a picture up there of one of our meetups in the top corner there of the ladies. That's our Manitoba group. We also have Ontario, who sort of just jumped in that weekend because she was in town. But if you also see the picture in the top corner, that's our Light It Green. And we had over 71 attendees this year at our Light It Green event. Included all stakeholders, including government officials. And in the last 2 years, we've raised over $50,000 for cancer research in Manitoba. So it's a pretty, yeah, thank you. I think more heartwarming than anything has been watching my children find their own unexpected gifts. My daughter and 2 of her friends' mothers, my daughter and her 2 friends' mothers all have cancer. Not my daughter, I keep tripping up on that one. My daughter, I have cancer, and so did the mothers of 2 of my daughter's friends. And as the girls like to say, when life gave them lemons, they made lemonade. Literally, they made lemonade. So we have a local initiative in Manitoba called the Lemonade Stands for Hope. And these girls took it to a new level. They've become the ambassadors for Lemonade Stands for Hope. They speak in the community, they speak at assemblies, they speak to the media, and they talk about how young people can have agency and how in a moment when you're feeling powerless, there are opportunities to feel empowered. My son, he's a little younger, but he's up there with the check. He's the check guy. Anytime there's a fundraiser that we're involved with, he gets to hold the check. But honestly, both of my children, I'm so proud of them, and I am so blessed to have had these last 3.5 years to see them grow into these beautiful human beings who are resilient and empathetic and who have this deep capacity to love. When I look back at the last 3.5 years, I am just so amazed at the progress. In the Canadian landscapes, we're seeing huge strides, and we continue to see such important work happening on the international level. And that's in large part due to the foundation. So, thank you for that to CCF. That's, you're driving change, and we are all so grateful for you. I think that when I look ahead and I see what's coming, there's more hope. It's hope, once again, more hope. And I know that as this landscape changes and as research advances and care advances, so too do the outcomes. And that's pretty special. On a personal note, my mainly stable disease we're having a little hiccup. And I'm scared. We have a plan, but I'm still scared. And as grateful as I am for the last 17 months of stability, because I know, especially with cholangiocarcinoma, that is a gift. That is not lost on me. But I find myself wanting more time. And I know I have more time. I just didn't want to have to think about the next step again. But regardless of what happens, I acknowledge that life is uncertain. It's fragile. It's hard. It's challenging. It really sucks sometimes. But it's precious. And it's beautiful. And it's so worth living if you're able to. I'll let you all get to lunch. And so I'll end by thanking everyone. To everyone up on this board or on the screen, thank you for the impact that you have had, not only in my own life, but in the lives of others. Thank you to my community for the connection and support and the comfort. Thank you to the healthcare professionals and the researchers who have been dedicated to my care and the care of others. Thank you to my family and my community. We have been able to lean on them so that we can lean into this journey. And to my husband and my children, thank you for being my why. And to all of you, everyone here and online, earlier I mentioned the unexpected gifts. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank each of you for being one of those gifts. Thank you very much. Thank you. And please send me your found hearts. I think my kids would be so excited to know that there are further hearts being sent our way. So if you do come across a heart, please send it. My information is up there.